Antarctica is patrolled by research fleets every year under international treaty. A creature the size of a small ship should never slip past that many cameras and sonar screens unnoticed, yet the first real trace of it never came from a scientist on a ship deck. It came from anonymous strangers online, piecing together fragments about a place none of them had ever visited. What they found buried in old forum posts still has not fully gone away. Reports describing the Ningen do not agree with each other, and that disagreement is part of why this story is so hard to either confirm or dismiss outright. The most common version describes a massive pale creature drifting through Antarctic waters, sometimes stretching 20 to 30 meters, with a smooth, blubbery body closer to a whale than anything else, but with limbs or a face that read as unmistakably human. A quieter version describes something smaller, just a head and a pair of legs, said to move across the ice sheets rather than stay in the water. Some versions add extra detail, describing skin so pale it looks almost see-through under moonlight, 5-fingered hands, oily unblinking eyes, or a mouth reduced to a thin slit curling upward into an unsettling smile. Others skip those specifics entirely and stick to size and outline, which means two people describing a Ningen sighting might only agree that something big and pale was involved, and that gap alone has kept the debate running for 2 decades without either side landing a knockout point. Believers argue this kind of disagreement makes sense if different witnesses saw the same animal from different angles or distances, the same way early reports of a genuinely new species often vary before enough sightings accumulate to settle on one description. Skeptics ask a fair question in response. Why would 2 very different descriptions end up sharing one name in the first place? Neither side has a specimen, a skeleton, or a single verified frame of footage to settle it, which is exactly why the story keeps circling back to where it actually began. Finding the true starting point of any internet legend is genuinely difficult, and the Ningen is a textbook case of why. Researchers who have dug into its origin keep landing on the same place, a Japanese message board called 2Channel, one of the largest anonymous forums in the world. The earliest identifiable version of the story dates back to around May 2002, describing an anonymous rumor tied to someone connected with Japan's Antarctic whaling research, claiming crews had spotted strange pale figures the post called Hitogata Butai, meaning human-shaped objects. That original thread faded out by late 2003 and resurfaced far more widely in 2007, gathering new details from new posters with each retelling. A manga artist working under the name Tenkyo-in picked up the resurfaced story around this time and turned the loose forum posts into a more dramatic, illustrated narrative built specifically around an Antarctic encounter. By November 2007, the Japanese paranormal magazine Mew had run its own feature on the phenomenon, describing a mysterious white figure spotted on Google Earth off the coast of Namibia as potentially a human-shaped monster, and tying the modern rumor directly to an even older reported sighting from 1958. That older sighting turned out to be a real documented event, and pulling it into the story gave the whole legend a considerably longer and stranger history than a simple 2000s forum post could provide on its own. On February 13th, 1958, the crew of a Japanese research vessel called the Soya reported spotting a huge dark object on the sea surface about 300 meters away while sailing through Lutzo Home Bay in Antarctica. The sighting was documented in a 1959 book titled Antarctic Transport, written by the ship's own captain, Mitsuji Matsumoto. The crew described the creature as resembling a whale but with an ape-like face, and the story later picked up the nickname Antarctic Godzilla, a pun built from the 2 Japanese words that also form the name Gojira, combining gorilla and whale. When Moo magazine and other paranormal outlets connected this older, genuinely documented sighting to the newer Ningen rumor decades later, it gave the modern internet legend something a pure forum post could never provide on its own: a real published account from a real ship's captain describing something unusual. That connection does not prove the Ningen exists, since the 1958 sighting described a whale-like animal with an unusual face rather than anything resembling the humanoid figure later internet posts described. Some Japanese researchers speculated the 1958 creature might have been a surviving Desmostylus, an extinct marine mammal, though that theory falls apart quickly since Desmostylus fossils have only ever been found in the northern hemisphere, and the species died out long before anything like a living population could have survived into the 20th century. What the 1958 account really shows is how a story with one real documented root can end up merged with a completely separate piece of internet fiction decades later, blending together until casual readers can no longer tell where the genuine maritime record ends and the invented internet lore begins. Japan's Antarctic whaling program is not something this legend made up. Japan launched its first post-war Antarctic whaling expeditions in the late 1940s, and by 1987 had reorganized the program under a research designation called JARPA, which ran until 2005 and was followed by an expanded version called JARPA 2 that continued studying whale populations across the Southern Ocean each austral summer. The centerpiece of that fleet for decades was a factory ship named Nishin Maru, large enough to process whale catches directly at sea, supported by smaller catcher boats hunting minke and other whale species. These expeditions were genuinely controversial internationally. The International Court of Justice ruled in 2014 that Japan's Antarctic research whaling program did not meet the scientific standard it claimed to follow, and Japan withdrew from the International Whaling Commission in 2019, shifting toward commercial whaling closer to its own coastline. None of that history involves a giant humanoid. What it confirms is that real Japanese ships with real crews spent real months every year working in the exact remote stretch of ocean this legend claims as its backdrop, and that borrowed credibility is very likely a big part of why the original post spread as convincingly as it did among readers who had no way to check it themselves. Once the story escaped that first forum thread, people wanted more than text. Photographs and video clips began circulating, each one presented as proof something was actually out there. Some footage shows a pale shape moving beneath ice. Other images show a massive form breaking the surface near a research vessel, matching the original story almost too neatly. Investigators looking closely at the most widely shared footage have traced several images back to digital editing or fully AI-generated artwork. At least one widely circulated still has been confirmed as AI-generated rather than a genuine photograph, which raises a real question about how much trust the rest of the imagery deserves, since a single manufactured image circulating alongside real ones makes it that much harder for an average viewer to tell which is which. Before we go any further, if a mystery like this is the kind of thing you enjoy, subscribing helps this channel keep chasing them down. In 2010, a Japanese ocean research company published underwater footage online, and near the end, viewers spotted what looked like a creature lying on the seafloor with small eyes and a wide, slit-like mouth. Japan's Enoshima Aquarium later identified the shape as an unusual rock formation, with two sponges creating what looked like eyes. Other alleged sightings have separately been explained away as icebergs or beluga whales caught at odd angles. Not every circulating image has been traced back this cleanly though, and that gap keeps the story from being fully closed either way. Before going further into what real researchers have recorded, it is worth being straightforward about what an AI chatbot like Grok genuinely contributes to a story built almost entirely out of forum posts and unverified photographs. Grok is built to read text, it is given and respond in plain conversational language. That is useful for plenty of everyday tasks. It is not a tool built to survey ocean floors, verify a photograph's origin, or confirm a biological claim, and it has no access to information about the Ningen beyond what has already been written by paranormal blogs, cryptid wikis, and the same anonymous forum posts described above. Someone asks Grok to describe evidence for a massive creature in Antarctic waters, and the chatbot pulls together a summary of exactly the internet material already covered here, then presents it in confident, dramatic language because that tone matches the question asked. That is not a discovery. It is a chatbot compiling publicly available cryptid content and repeating it back more dramatically, and treating that compilation as new evidence is exactly how an unverified internet legend gets mistaken for a scientific finding worth reporting. In 2020, media researchers Felicity Greenland and Philip Hayward published a detailed study in the journal Shima, specifically examining how the Ningen legend formed and spread. Their research traced how, around 2010, Ningen images began crossing from Japanese-language internet spaces into English-language websites and YouTube videos, almost always using the same small handful of low-quality images to give the story a credibility it had not earned. Even sites sympathetic to the legend admitted the supporting material amounted to little more than a few lackluster videos and questionable photographs. Their research also tracked the legend into mainstream tabloid coverage, including a 2016 story in the UK Daily Mirror, built by collating earlier internet material rather than any new reporting. Greenland and Hayward frame the Ningen as a modern pattern where remote ocean regions become blank spaces onto which internet culture projects new folklore, precisely because so few people can personally verify what does or does not live there. Their paper also traced the legend into fan art communities, where artists reshaped the Ningen from a menacing threat into gentler, more sympathetic depictions, and even into short online fan fiction and fan-made music videos, showing how far a piece of internet monster fiction can travel, once enough creative people decide to keep building on it long after the original forum thread went quiet. Antarctica is one of the most heavily monitored wildernesses on the planet, at least on paper. Research stations run by multiple countries operate under the Antarctic Treaty System, signed by 12 nations in 1959 and expanded many times since, governing scientific cooperation and environmental protection across the continent and its surrounding waters. Marine life also falls under CCAMLR, the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, an international body that coordinates fish stock surveys, krill population counts, and ecosystem health monitoring across the Southern Ocean using data contributed by multiple member countries every year. Japanese research vessels alone have logged thousands of hours surveying whale populations across these waters. Search that entire body of published research for anything resembling the Ningen, and you find nothing. No logged sighting, no unexplained sonar return, no footnote mentioning an unidentified giant. That silence could mean nothing like this has ever crossed paths with a research vessel, or, as some argue, that something this elusive simply has not been caught yet in an ocean where much of the deep sea floor remains unmapped. Sonar coverage across the Southern Ocean, while extensive along common routes, still leaves enormous stretches of deep water essentially unwatched for years at a time. Both possibilities can sit side by side without contradicting each other, since absence of proof is not automatically proof of absence, and that same question about trusting your own eyes in this part of the world has a much older and stranger answer than most people expect. Polar regions produce one of the strangest, best documented optical illusions on the planet. Called a fata morgana, it happens when a sharp temperature difference between cold air near the surface and warmer air above bends light dramatically, stretching, stacking, and inverting a distant object until it looks unrecognizable. The same basic phenomenon is widely credited with inspiring centuries of ghost ship legends at sea, including the Flying Dutchman, and it has been documented directly from McMurdo Station, with explorers writing about it in polar waters for over a century. Both Roald Amundsen and Ernest Shackleton documented ghostly, distorted shapes on the horizon now understood to be fata morgana mirages rather than anything physically present. The effect has fooled trained explorers badly enough to genuinely alter maps. In 1906, explorer Robert Peary reported seeing a massive landmass he named Crocker Land. When Donald Macmillan led a follow-up expedition years later to actually reach it, an Inuit hunter named Piu Gatok recognized the shape as an illusion he called a pukjok. Macmillan pushed on for days anyway before admitting the hunter had been right. Crocker Land never existed. If a trained polar explorer can chase a landmass that was never really there for days at a time, a distant glimpse of pale ice or a stretched, inverted reflection off open water becomes a far more believable source for a strange sighting than it might first seem. Exactly the kind of environment where a story like this could take root without anything physical behind it at all. The Ningen has never settled into a single, consistent form. Its size shifts depending on who is telling the story. Its face shifts between humanoid and completely blank. Whether it swims or walks depends entirely on which version you come across first. Researchers who study how online cryptid stories spread describe this kind of shape-shifting as typical of a legend built collaboratively by many contributors rather than reported independently by separate witnesses describing the same real event. Every person who added a detail to that original thread left their own fingerprint on what the creature supposedly looks like, and none of those additions ever needed to match the version before it, which is exactly the kind of pattern a much better documented case from Western internet culture also shows, right down to the way both stories grew almost entirely without any central author steering them. In June 2009, a user on the forum Something Awful named Eric Knudsen, posting as Victor Surge, submitted 2 edited photographs to a contest for fake paranormal images, showing a tall, thin, faceless figure he called Slender Man. Other forum users immediately began adding their own photographs and stories, and within weeks the character had grown into a shared mythology spanning nearly 200 pages of posts. Slender Man went on to inspire web series, video games, and a 2018 feature film. In 2014, 2 young girls in Wisconsin were involved in a stabbing that investigators publicly linked to their belief in the mythology, a case that drew national coverage and later an HBO documentary. Slender Man is one of the only major internet monsters whose creator is fully identified and on record, making it possible to trace exactly how a fictional character built through anonymous forum collaboration can grow convincing enough that some readers briefly treated it as real. The Ningen followed a nearly identical path, minus a single identifiable creator, spreading instead through anonymous collective editions on 2channel, and that precedent did not need a real creature behind it to become genuinely influential. Most investigators check the boring possibilities first, because the Southern Ocean is genuinely full of large, pale, unfamiliar animals. Southern elephant seals grow close to 5 meters, and their blubbery bodies can look strange half submerged in fog or low polar light. Icebergs constantly calve and shift, briefly forming pale shapes that catch a boat's spotlight and play tricks on tired eyes during long polar shifts, especially during the parts of the year when daylight stays dim and gray for hours at a stretch. Psychologists studying pareidolia, the tendency for the human brain to impose familiar shapes like faces or bodies onto random visual noise, point out that once someone already expects to see a Ningen, an ordinary iceberg or wave pattern becomes far easier to reinterpret as something humanoid. None of those explanations perfectly account for a creature specifically described as 20 to 30 meters long with human-like limbs. A misidentified seal explains a vague pale shape reasonably well. It does a much weaker job explaining a detailed, repeated description of arms, legs, or a humanoid face, and that gap is where this story has lived for over 20 years, never quite explained away and never quite confirmed. Large animals in water and on land follow very different rules, since water supports weight in a way solid ground never can. A creature walking across Antarctic ice on human-like legs, at anywhere close to the size some accounts describe, would need a skeletal structure far outside what any known mammal lineage has produced. No fossil record, genetic trace, or physical remains of any species combining whale-scale mass with human-proportioned limbs has ever surfaced. Believers point to species like the coelacanth, thought extinct for millions of years until a live specimen turned up off South Africa in 1938, or the giant squid, known only through washed-up remains for over a century before it was finally filmed alive in 2004. Those surprises are real, and the actual list of them is longer and more recent than most people realize. The colossal squid was first identified in 1925 after a marine biologist found arm crowns inside a sperm whale's stomach near the Shetland Islands. For the next 100 years, scientists only ever encountered it through remains pulled from whale stomachs or dead specimens washed ashore. It was not filmed alive until March 2025, when a Schmidt Ocean Institute vessel captured footage of a juvenile near the South Sandwich Islands, close to Antarctic waters. Adults can grow past 7 meters and weigh 500 kilograms, and only a handful have ever been recovered in the entire history of studying the species. The megamouth shark was completely unknown to science until 1976, when one became entangled in a US Navy ship's anchor. Only around 100 confirmed sightings have been logged since. None of these animals looked anything like a humanoid, and none solved the biological problems a Ningen-shaped creature would still face. But they prove the deep ocean can keep an enormous animal secret from science for a century at a stretch, which is exactly the kind of gap that keeps this legend from being dismissed as flatly impossible. After the story resurfaced around 2007, Tenkyoin's manga pushed the legend further into mainstream Japanese pop culture, moving it from a niche internet rumor into something closer to a recognizable folklore character. Fans of the 2022 video games Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have pointed out that the creature line Seatotl and Sedaton appears to draw visual inspiration from the Ningen's most common description, showing how far the character traveled into recognizable global pop culture within 20 years of that first forum post. More recently, a creator known as the Manticore produced a short analog horror series titled The Ningen, built around fake found footage designed to feel like a leaked research recording, drawing a genuinely positive response from horror audiences online who praised its unsettling atmosphere. Each adaptation did what earlier retellings on 2channel had already been doing since 2002, reshaping a flexible creature for a new audience without ever settling it into one final agreed-upon form. Most internet rumors fade within a year or two once the initial excitement wears off. The Ningen has spread the opposite way, moving from one anonymous forum thread into paranormal magazines, tabloid coverage, peer-reviewed academic study, and an ecosystem of YouTube and horror content that keeps finding new audiences more than 20 years later. Part of that staying power comes from the setting. Since Antarctica remains one of the least accessible places on the planet, and every retelling leans on a location most viewers can never personally verify. Part of it comes from the story's flexibility, since a creature without a fixed shape can adapt to any new platform without being disproven by a single mismatched detail. Whether that staying power reflects genuine unfinished business or a very well-built piece of internet folklore is still the exact question nobody has closed the book on. Here is where things actually stand. The earliest known account traces back to a Japanese forum post from around 2002, expanded and popularized in 2007 through manga, and a feature in the magazine Mew, which also linked the modern rumor to a genuinely documented 1958 sighting by the crew of the research ship Soya. A 2020 academic study by Felicity Greenland and Philip Hayward, published in the journal Shima, traced exactly how this piece of internet fiction crossed into English language media by 2010 and into tabloid coverage and fan art communities. No Antarctic research program under the Antarctic Treaty System, or CCAMLR, has ever logged anything matching the Ningen, despite thousands of documented hours surveying these exact waters. Several of the most widely shared images have been traced back to digital manipulation, AI generation, or straightforward misidentification, including a rock formation Japanese researchers confirmed was mistaken for the creature in one widely circulated video. The creature's most common described size and shape run into serious problems under basic animal biology, even while real surprises like the colossal squid, only filmed alive in March 2025, prove the ocean can hide large animals from science for a century at a time. What cannot be said with confidence is whether every sighting behind this legend has a mundane explanation, or whether something unfamiliar drifted past a ship window often enough to help start a story this durable. The Southern Ocean remains one of the most unexplored environments on Earth, and until someone produces a specimen or footage nobody can pick apart, that question stays open. What is certain is that no AI chatbot has added a single new fact to any of it, since everything worth knowing here was already sitting in forum archives and peer-reviewed research long before anyone thought to ask Grok about it. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe, and I will see you in the next deep dive.